Okay, good evening, everyone, both live and online. Um, for those who have joined online, just joined online, and I also posted on the YouTube recording, I put a link to the handout. So apologies, I didn't manage to get the handout out earlier via email. But if you click on the chat function, you should see the link to the handout. So we looked. I think we finished last week a look at the sugya that discusses who Iyov was, what we know about him, and when he lived, and based on that, some insight into into the context of why the book was written, and for what reason. I would like actually just to take one look at the Rambam in Mon Nevuchim, which we'll look at considerably later properly. But if we are talking about who was Iyov and when he lived, just have a look at the Rambam, which I printed on page 3. I printed the Rambam at length, and the Rambam has 3 chapters, or 2 chapters really, on the book of Iyov, which he discussed in his Mon Nevuchim, in his guide to the perplexed. But on page 3, let's just have a look at the first few lines of what he writes. He writes, I took this English translation from Friedlander, but it's not always an entirely great translation. He writes, "The strange and wonderful book of Job." The Mon Nevuchim, of course, was written in Arabic, so we only ever access it in a translation, whether in Hebrew or in English. And he says that the strange and wonderful book of Iyov treats of the same subject as we were discussing. In other words, this is a section in Mon Nevuchim which is dealing with the problem of evil. The Rambam's Arabic, I assume, here refers to the book as something like Nifla or Pella. Pella can mean a wonder, and it can also mean something strange. So I assume that's where this translation comes from. When the Rambam writes that the book is a Pella, is wonderful or wondrous, I assume that's where it comes from. He then says its basis is fiction, conceived for the purpose of explaining the different opinions which people hold on divine providence. So he is paskening, like the view we saw in the Gemara in Boba Basra, that this book is not history. The language of the Gemara that we saw when we looked in previous weeks is that the Gemara brought a Talmud who said that the book it never was, and it's written as a work of allegory or metaphor. It's really a philosophical work written as a narrative. Now, the Gemara rejected this view seemingly, and the Gemara said that it's legitimate to say that part of the Torah can be a mashal or a metaphor, like perhaps Shir HaShirim is a metaphor. It sounds like it's a story of a relationship between lovers who fought out with each other, and we know that Chazal understood it as a metaphor about our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's okay to say that's a mashal. Why is it okay to say that's a mashal? Because it doesn't have any extra historical details. But when you have a book, and the Gemara that also referenced the story of the Novi who rebukes David HaMelech and tells him a story of a poor man and a rich man, and again, we understand that's a mashal. But when we have a Sefer in Nach, which references details, for example, a location, like Utz, there says the Gemara, the Maskana of the Gemara seems to be, you can't say that the story is a mashal. You can't say it's a parable. The Rambam here paskins that it is, or in Mon Nevuchim brings the view that it is a parable. And then he says, you know that some of the sages, some of Chazal clearly stated that Iyov never existed and has never been created, and that he is fiction, poetic fiction, what we would call a mashal. So it's interesting that the Rambam is paskening, as it were, like the view that the Gemara seems to reject, or the Rambam, at least in Mon Nevuchim, is bringing this as a normative view, that the book is a metaphor. Then he says what we said: those who assume that he had existed and that the book is historical are unable to determine when and where Job lived. Some of our sages say that he lived in the days of the patriarchs. Others hold that he was a contemporary of Moshe. Others place him in the days of David, and others believe that he at the beginning of the Babylonian exile. We saw this, and then he says the difference of opinion supports the assumption that he has never existed in reality. But whether he existed or not, that what is related in the experience of frequent occurrences, sorts of perplexity to all thinkers, etc. So what's important about the book of Iyov is the philosophical idea that it contains, the grappling it has with the different views of good and evil and suffering, not whether it occurred historically. From all the multiplicity of views you see, as we said, that Chazal had no clear mitzvah about when it lived, but rather, and that's why we're open to the suggestion that this book never really took place. He then, at the end of the first section, Yeah.
Tomorrow it talks about Iyov is found in certain places in certain references to Iyov in Jerusalem.
So that's the Gemara that we learned in previous weeks, where the Gemara links him to various historical events, like being an advisor to Paraton. But the Gemara and the Gemara has a multiplicity of views. I think we saw 10 opinions about when Iyov lived and how to locate him in history. But the Gemara brings an opinion that the whole book is a moshel, that it never happened. The Gemara seems to reject this opinion because you can't explain why the Torah would give a location. That's going a step too far. And the Rambam seems to accept this opinion, that it's not a rejected opinion. At the end of chapter 22, which is here on page 3 in the handouts, and again, for those who have just joined, I'll paste the link again to the handouts in the chat. The Rambam says, he goes through the book and he explains the location of the story, which takes place in Eretz Uz, and he says that location is part of the metaphor, part of the moshel. And he brings terms that Uz means to take advice or to think deeply, to grasp ideas, to comprehend them. And he says the reason the story takes place in Eretz Uz is because the pasuk is saying this is a story that takes place in the lands of deep thought. That's how he translates the pasuk. There was the man Iyov who lived where? He lived in the lands of Uz. What's the land of Uz? Utzu, right? Think deeply, think carefully about things. So it's interesting. The very Gemara that seems to reject the idea that it can be a metaphor, because otherwise, why would the pasuk give a location? That's a step too far. The Rambam is willing to take as a metaphor. The second point that I want to bring from the Rambam, and this gets us back to where I want to begin looking at, which is the question of, did Iyov respond correctly or not? And we saw again in the Gemara that we learned together one source that says that Iyov failed. We then saw we haven't seen this, but there's a whole continuation of the Gemara, which hopefully in future weeks we will learn together, in which the Gemara says that Iyov's response is poor, at least initially, and we'll have to understand why. There is an opinion in the Gemara, which is that we saw that Iyov never does teshuvah. His teshuvah is not really accepted properly, and his resultant good life is Rosh Hashanah is even a wicked person having a good life. Though there's also an opinion that's the Pshuto Shel Mikra, the simplest understanding, that Iyov does teshuvah and it's accepted. The Rambam points out in the middle paragraph here on page 3 in chapter 22 that even though Iyov is described at the beginning of the Sefer, and I think we have the Psukim, yes, I printed the Psukim at the top of page 1. At the top of page 1, I printed the Gemara, which says that Iyov was blasphemous and failed his trial. Then I began quoting Psukim, and look at the very opening Psukim. Ish hoyo be'eretz Utz. There was a man in the land of Utz, which the Rambam translates as counsel and deep thought. Iyov Shemai. V'hoyo ish hahu tom v'yosha. This man was perfect and upright. V'yorei elokim, and God-fearing. V'samira, and shuns evil. What description of Iyov is missing? Which adjective would we have liked to see about Iyov in this pasuk? Sorry? Not described as a tzaddik. What other description is missing? He's not described as a chacham. So the Rambam says that Iyov he's not a chacham. He's very frum, but he's simple. He's not a wise person, and that's why he responds badly to this nisayon. So the Rambam, as is his way, says that Iyov is very special. He's a tom. He's a perfect person. He's pure. He's yosha. He's straight. He's yorelikim. He's God-fearing. But he's missing a depth of insight into wisdom. And the book of Iyov, as a parable or as a true story, is him going through suffering to teach him ideas. And by the end of the story, he emerges with a much more sophisticated understanding of Hashem, and grows wiser through these experiences. So this is what the Rambam says. I'm just trying to see if I printed this this little quote that in which I say that he's not wise. I wonder if I cut it out of the sources accidentally. Yes.
The same kind of description.
As chacham, exactly. There's the tom and there's the chacham, and that's the Rambam's diuk here, that you can be a tom without being a chacham. Exactly right. I have a feeling that I didn't print this. So Yaakov is described as having two qualities. He's an Ishtom and he's Yoshev Aholim. Yoshev Aholim means he's a dweller, intense, he's a thinker, he's a student, and he's an Ishtom. But when you have Ishtom by itself, then that's not that's someone lacking certain qualities. That's the Rambam's reading of the Psukim. I have a feeling that accidentally I cut out the source, and I will put it back in Yetz Hashem for next week, or on the handout that I linked to in the YouTube clip. Yeah, sorry.
The real thing is he's described as a chacham, not because nobody apart from Shlomo is described as a chacham.
We need is he online? We need Ian Bider here, or one of our Badei Kura. Oh, we've got David here.
Isn't Yosef,
David, thank you. Sorry, David. Yes.
isn't Yosef is mentioned as chacham by
Yosef is mentioned as chacham. Thank you, Baruch Hashem. We have someone who knows. Yosef, yeah, someone who knows things. Excellent. Yeah, it's described by Paro though. Yeah, not like the second. Okay, so we have to go to Nach, and either way, this is the Rambam's Tiyuk. It's looking very, very interesting. Interesting way of reading the Psukim.
Ein novon v'chacham kamocha.
Paro, yes. Yeah, thank you.
Paro. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Do we
Sorry,
have
I couldn't unmute quickly enough. Sorry about that.
We're coming to the Sedras though. Also, when the descriptions of Betzalel and building the base of the Mishkan, what qualities are described there? Is there the word?
Yes, chachmei leiv. It says chachmei leiv.
Yes, chachmei leiv. Okay. Where else do we have? Okay, we're not going to do a whole talk tonight. But there are people that describe it as chacham. Okay. So that's in a sense a completion of last week's and a little introduction to how poorly or well did Iyov do. Okay, so I've printed here. I was asked last week and mistakenly I said no, but for next week, please, if maybe I'll try and I'll give some handouts for those who want, but also if people can try and come along with if they want to save a lot of paper and trees, to try and come along with a copy of Iyov, because we are going to learn through Psukim. But I printed here a very brief extract of Iyov's response in chapter 3. Iyov achrei chen, afterwards. Pasach Iyov es piho. Iyov opens. So this is back to page 1. Sorry. So we're looking at the second box. Perek Aleph Pasuk Aleph. There was a man in the land of Utz named Iyov. We saw those psukim. Pasuk 1:8, which we're not going to look at now, is the Hashem speaking to the Soton and saying, "There's no one like Iyov who is Ishtom v'yashar yorelikim v'samira." There's no one quite as perfect as Iyov. Then all the suffering happens. Achreichem pasach Iyov es pihu v'yikalelis yomo. Iyov opens his mouth and he curses his day. What does it mean to curse your day? We look at the later psukim. Yovad yom ivolid bo. He says, "Let the day perish wherein I was born." V'halayla omar hora gover. And the night where it was said, a boy, a man-child, is brought forth. So cursing your day means wishing you were never created. And he carries on. Hayom hahu yechoshech al yidushu elo kamimal. That day should be darkness. Hashem shouldn't inquire after it. V'al of Nora shouldn't have light over it. Yigolei choshech v'salmoves tishkun olav anonal. Let darkness and the shadow of death claim it for their own. Let a cloud dwell on it. Yivasu kamir yom. Let all that makes the day black terrified. In other words, he wishes that he would never have been born. Then in Perek Dalad and on, the friends of Iyov respond to him, and basically their response is that Iyov understand that the way to comprehend the world is that if you are good, you do well, and if you are bad, you suffer, and you experience evil. And they tell him off for his hypocrisy, and they go on and on about this. This is chapters upon chapters in which they give a view of hashgacha pratis, in which those who are righteous prosper and those who are wicked suffer, and therefore you, Iyov, must be wicked. And that's how to explain your suffering. Now, since Ein Sadik Ba'oret Asher Yasa Tov V'lo Yachta, there's no one who does nothing wrong. That's always a good response, in a sense. That always works. In other words, you can always turn to anyone suffering and say, come on, look yourself in the mirror. Are you perfect? Have you never got anything wrong? None of us can confidently claim that. And therefore, we can always explain suffering. We will see probably next week 2 nuances. One is, are the friends all responding in the same way, or can we unpick differences in their response? And we'll try and see again the analysis of the Rambam in his Mo Nevuchim, in which he thinks there's subtle differences in how the friends respond. The second question we will see is whether their response is a correct response to suffering or not. At the end of Sefer Iyov, let's just jump to page 2, at the bottom of page 2. Vayhi acha diber Hashem es advarim ha'ela el Iyov. After Hashem spoke to Iyov, which is the whole of chapters 38 to 41, and the whole of, there's 3 chapters in which Hashem says to Iyov something, which we'll have to look at. Iyov accepts Hashem's words, the beginning of chapter 42, and then at the end of chapter 42, Vayhi acha diber Hashem es advarim ha'ela el Iyov. After Hashem spoke these words to Iyov, Vayom Hashem el Eliphaz HaTemani, Hashem speaks to Eliphaz the Temani, who's one of his friends, and he says, Chora api b'cha u'b'shnei re'acha. This is the top of page 3. I'm furious with you and with your 2 friends. Kilo debartem elai nechona ka'avdi Iyov. You haven't spoken about me correctly, like my servant Iyov. And then he says, bring karbonos. And let my servants, Iyov should offer a carbon for your behalf. The Iyov avdi yispalel aleichem, and Iyov, my servant, will daven for you. Ki impanov esa, because him I'll show favor. Levilti asos imachem nevala, not to punish you. Ki lo debatem elai nechona ka'avdi Iyov, because you didn't speak about me correctly as my servant Iyov. Now, it's unclear what the friends have done wrong in their response. But at least one way of understanding is that their comfort to Iyov, in which they present a simple view of if you do good, you'll do well, and if you do bad, you will suffer, is incorrect. That Hashem takes that as an insult to lo diber nechona. You didn't speak correctly about me. That's certainly how the Rambam takes these psukim, and we'll see that again in, at least how one way of the Rambam cites the Sweis in the Sukkim, and again we'll see that in Mitzvah Hashem next week probably as we look at the Rambam in more detail. The friends also accuse Iyov of hypocrisy, and this is very important because I think all of us need to hear these words of Musa, even though perhaps the friends weren't so correct in saying that to Iyov when he's low. And what they say to Iyov, I think is very important. They say to Iyov, when things were going well, you were a big marmin in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you praised him and you counseled others who were going through tough times, and you gave them a very emunah-full betochen response. And now when you're suffering, suddenly it's not so easy. You're being a hypocrite. Surely you need to turn on yourself and say what you've always said to others. And again, if the book here is telling us this, whether the story, the whole of Sefer Iyov, is a moshel and a parable, or whether it's true, clearly it's literal. Clearly, the text that's selected for us of what the friends say is important for us to learn. In other words, it doesn't necessarily tell us everything they said, it tells us what we need to learn today. So let's just have a quick read. Vayan Eliphaz HaTemani Vayom, and this is back to page 1, chapter 4, the middle box. Hanissa dova elecha tila, v'atzar b'milin miyuchal. Can I say something to you? Are you too tired? But how can I withhold myself from speaking? And now come these painful words. Hinei yisata rabim. You instructed or rebuked many. V'yodayim rofes techazik. And you strengthened the weak hands of people. So you were a Baal Musa. You gave people Musa. You gave people Eitzah. You gave people advice. And you gave people chizuk. Think what you did. Koshel yakimun milecha. The words that lifted those who were falling, or reclaim courage to amit, and that strengthened those who had bowing needs. And now ki ata tova elecha v'teila. It comes on you. Now it comes on you v'teila, and suddenly you're weary. Tiga odecha v'tiboil. It touches you and you become confused and afraid. Halo yiroscha kis losecha. Isn't your yiras shamayim, your fear of Hashem, your confidence, tikvoscha, and your hope, the son drachecha, and the purity of your ways? So this is I think these are very powerful words, that when we give chizuk to others, or musa to others, or instruction to others, but what happens when it comes to us? And suddenly we're not so good at giving musa and instruction. Then they say, Zechorna, remember, mihu noki ovot. Have you ever heard of an innocent person being destroyed? The Eifa Yeshorim nichodu, and where were the upright cut off? Kasher Ra'isi, as far as I've seen, says Eliphaz, Choshe Ovon, those who plow iniquity, the Zore Omol Yikotseru, and those who sow trouble, that's what they harvest. Because from the breath of Hashem they perish, and from his anger they are consumed. So here we're getting to an important message of Sefer Iyov, that when we give others chizuk, and when we speak about emunah and bitochen and yiras shamayim and musa to others, but when we go through these things, are we really up to living and doing them? Can anyone see a problem though in Eliphaz's responses? Can anyone see a problem in his message? Sorry?
Quite a few people we would term as righteous or separate. I mean, we often say that we don't understand, that we don't have the ability to understand God's ways. You know, he's Tzaddik B'Yashar, but we don't have the ability to understand it. Our view is not. That's like our understanding. So for him to say it never happens.
So the first challenge here is, he says this never happens. Is this correct? Right? On the other hand, even the righteous that suffer, are they really perfect? Completely perfect? Have they done nothing wrong? And this is the problem over here. So he may be right, the perfect never suffer, because whoever is perfect. But what does that really mean? And what is perfection? And is that doable? Someone off group last time when I spoke about relative perfection, someone who's philosophically inclined, wrote that's obviously an oxymoron. What does relative perfection mean, right? But this is a problem. What do we actually mean by perfection in the context of what it means to be a human? If none of us are perfect, and imperfection leads to suffering, then we have an equation that's a problem. And that's exactly what Chazal and the Rambam are going to do to this piece, and why they see Eliphaz as being wrong in his response. Yeah.
Moshe Rabbeinu gave chizuk.
So someone's just speaking live. I'll come to you in a moment, but someone's just speaking.
Sorry.
So he might have been counselling people with different problems and different issues. They weren't suffering like he was suffering.
Okay, so we don't know the comparisons of suffering. That's true, but you're bringing out a point, which is that Eliphaz here has fallen into the same trap, because he's giving Iyov Musa, and he's saying, come on, hear your own voice, that you gave people chizuk, you gave people Musa, you had all these clever words when you were suffering. How about now applying them to yourself? But there's a question here: is he doing the same to Iyov and giving Iyov comfort actually when he doesn't know and understand really what Eliphaz is going through? Yeah.
Is a relative term. For one person, what they may consider a suffering, another person would not necessarily see it that way at all, which is quite relevant to anybody's assessment of the situation. And the other thing is that he accuses Iyov of saying, well, when everything is going okay, you're praising God's prophet, you're suggesting that this is all the other Hashem. It's often the other way around. That when everything is going great, Theodicy, you don't actually see that it's coming from a God's prophet, and that it's only when things are tough that you think, okay, well, how am I going to get out of this? And you turn to God's prophet. So it's quite a surprising point that he brought out.
So there are questions about when are we closer to Hashem, when we're suffering or when we're going through good times. We did discuss this question a little bit in previous weeks, and we will touch on it a bit more when we look at the accusation of the Satan, when he turns to Hashem and says, now you have to give Iyov in a sign. And your other point is also right. We can't really know what suffering is and how to rate suffering and what experiences really are called suffering or not. Yeah. Okay, so this is Eliphaz's response. I wanted to give you a sample of where Iyov eventually gets to, and this is Perek Yud Tes. If I can find my notes in it, so I put my notes in this, but if not, we'll just read the psukim. Okay, I don't have my notes in this, but we'll read the psukim. Look at Perek Yud Tes at the bottom of page 1. This is now Iyov speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vayan Iyov Vayoma. And by the way, I want us to notice how special Nach is, because here we have someone who's a complicated character, whether he passes or fails his nisoyon. It's obviously ridiculous to talk about how special Nach is. It's from sorry, David, I didn't go back to you. I'll take your question in a minute. From HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there's a bravery in putting these next words into Nach, because we're going to see what a human is capable of saying to Hashem, and Nach, whether wrong or right, Nach considers it worthy of quoting, that we need to hear the pain of what he cries out. Oh, sorry, David, I forgot to come back to you.
So I was just writing in the chat. Well, I was going to say Moshe Rabbeinu spent most of the Torah giving chizuk and mussar to Bnei Israel, but he himself was in despair. He lost faith so many times, and Hashem had to pick him up. So, according to the view that Moshe wrote Iyov, that would be even odder for this, for what Eliphaz is saying here.
Okay, so 2 points about that. First, we don't really find Moshe giving mussar to Klal Yisrael. The only time we find him, we really find Moshe. Most of the time, we find Moshe defending Klal Yisrael to Hashem. Actually, it's interesting. One of the few times that we find him giving mussar to the Jewish people is the famous story of where he hits the rock, and according to the Rambam at least, his display of anger is what his fate was there at hitting the rock, and this is why he's punished for not being allowed into Eretz Israel. So it's very interesting to look at Moshe as a leader and see how few times he turns and tells people off. Either this Shabbos or next Shabbos, I'm normally very I can only prepare drushes very close to Shabbos because I need to be in the zone of things that are going on. But for lots of reasons this week, I've been thinking a lot about understanding other positions and mistakes that people make. And there's a story in the building of the Mishkan and the consecration of the Mishkan in which Moshe turns to Aaron, talking about here in Sefer Vayikra, and thinks Aaron has messed up something in the Chanukah Mishkan and tells Aaron off wrongly. And I hope either this week or next week to speak about the concept of telling people off wrongly and how that's intertwined with the concept of Kedusha and building the Mishkan. But Moshe actually very rarely tells people off. It's very interesting. Yeah.
He said that he defends Bnei Israel, but what he also does is he offers himself up almost like a personal korban.
Yes.
To try and protect Bnei Israel.
Yes.
That's what happens at Ego after,
yes.
And other occasions as well, where he says, look, don't leave them, but take me.
Yes. And we're going to look later at the concept of, and this also comes up with the sons of Aaron, the Krovai Kodesh. Is there, and I appreciate this is sensitive in the context of other faiths, is there a Jewish concept of someone suffering on behalf of other people and on behalf of a generation? Is that a legitimate idea or not? And is that what's going on with Iyov also? Is it possible that Iyov is suffering on behalf of others? And how do we make sense of that? Okay, what I want to do though is look now at Perek Yud Tes, just to get a taste of what Iyov says. And this is Iyov speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, amazing. And he says, Ad honor tugyon nafshi, how long will you weary my soul? Vasatkuni b'milim, and crush me with things. Ze'esa pomim tachlimuni, 10 times you've reproached me. Lo sivoshi takru li, are you not ashamed that you do this to me? V'af omnon shogisi, even if I've made a mistake, iti tolun meshagasi, my error remains with me. Im omnon olai tagdilu, if you will make yourself great against me, V'sochichi olai cheposi, and rebuke me with my shame. Know that Hashem has distorted my path and has trapped me in his net. So here he's making a claim similar to Avram's claim, which is, how long are you going to punish me? Okay, I get it. I've done something wrong, but you're going to hit me and hit me and hit me again. And if I've made a mistake, so I've made a mistake, that's with me and I've acknowledged it. And if you're going to magnify my mistakes, then all you've done is caught me in a net. To be a human is just to be trapped by Kodesh Baruch Hu, because none of us can get it perfect. And then he says, and this is the top of page 2, Hein etzak chomos v'lo eoneh. I've cried out chomos, violence, and I haven't been answered. Ashaver ve'ein mishpat. I cry aloud, but there is no justice. So here we see HaKadosh Avram, who says Hashofet karayot lo yasa mishpat. Iyov says there is no mishpat, and he cries out Chomos against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who's Chomos associated with? Who does Chomos in the Torah? This is the Dor HaMabul, right? The Dor HaMabul does Chomos, and Iyov accuses Hashem of Chomos. An amazing claim. And by the way, I think we can hear his pain here, right? And we're meant to hear his pain. The Psukim are helping us hear his pain. Yeah.
Sometimes says, he's only had it over good, he's never had to suffer. Then in a way, what the other saying is true. This isn't because of your reason, this is because sometimes it's good.
So we'll have to try and understand what the Satan's claim is. But these psukim are being brought because Iyov is right in a way. That's why they're being brought. Whether Iyov should be judged harshly for his response or shouldn't be judged harshly for his response, whether he's irredeemable or does teshuvah or doesn't even need to do teshuvah for this, it's being brought because it's valuable enough that it's definitely a possibility that we need to consider. There's a reason why Nach is bringing all of this. In other words, there's again, I don't want to jump. I mean, let's jump ahead. Just have a brief look at the Rambam here, because these are so important, because this is real to us. Let's have a look at. I haven't printed it here. Okay, I printed the wrong extract. Did I print the wrong extract? Yeah. Okay. It's not in handouts. I'll put it in the updated handouts. The Rambam brings the view in the Gemara that Iyov at this point has become a heretic. In other words, he goes through a stage of heresy, and then he says, "How can it be that Iyov's friends are rebuked and Iyov is rewarded?" And his answer is because. Well, he brings the answer. Oh, no, hey, have a look. I bring a little bit of it. End of page 4. Sorry, I do bring a little bit of it. The third last. Okay, here. Fourth last paragraph. The fifth last paragraph. The friends, on the other hand, contend that those who act well. So again, this is Arabic, but we're reading in English, so we're entitled to read this in English. This is page 4, the fourth last paragraph, the second paragraph of the page. The friends, on the other hand, contend that those who act well receive reward, and those who act wickedly are punished. When a wicked and rebellious person is seen in prosperity, it may be assumed for certain that change will take place. He will die, or troubles will afflict him in his house. So if you see a wicked person prospering, you can know for sure that life will turn bad with him. And when we find a worshipper of Hashem in misfortune, we may be certain Hashem will heal the stroke of his wound, etc. Then he says, Iyov found in this fact a proof that listen to this, that the righteous and the wicked are equal before Hashem, who holds all mankind in contempt. So Iyov puts forward the view that HaKadosh Baruch Hu disregards mankind. That's how far Iyov goes. Iyov therefore says, this is one thing, therefore I said it. He destroys the perfect and the wicked. So he treats the perfect and the wicked the same way. If the scourge slay suddenly, he will laugh at the trial of the innocent. Hashem laughs at what's going on. He doesn't care about what's happening to us. He explains there's no hope after death. This is the Rambam quoting. So the cause of the misfortune of the righteous man is nothing else but entire neglect on the part of Hashem. He's therefore surprised that Hashem has not abandoned the creation of man altogether, and that after, etc. Then he says, this is one of the different views held by some thinkers in Providence, and he carries on. Our sages condemn this view of Job as mischievous. Again, this is a translation. This is the corrupt view. Chazal do not accept a view. There are philosophers that in modern day philosophy call this deism, that think that Hashem is removed from creation and completely indifferent to our fate. And they express their feeling about these words in the following: dust should have filled the mouth of Iyov. Iyov wished to upset the tradition as he wants to turn the world on his head. He denied the resurrection of the dead. He commenced to blaspheme. So what Iyov is saying is kafira. Okay, it's heresy. Then it says, when, however, Hashem says to Eliphaz and his colleagues, you have not spoken of me as this is right, as my servant Iyov has, how can Hashem, and we saw that, I think we saw those psukim at the top of page 3, for you have not spoken truth about me, as did my servant Iyov. Listen to what the Rambam says. Our sages assume as the cause of this rebuke the maxim, man is not punished for that which he utters in his pain. And Hashem ignored the sin of Iyov in his utterance because of the acuteness of his suffering. The Rambam quotes this from Chazal, and this is based on the Gemara, but this is how he understands Chazal. He then goes on and says that he has a different view of this. But listen to what we're being told, because I tried to say at the beginning when we learned Iyov, it's not just a book of philosophy, it's a book of psychology, because it's telling us about a character. There's a reason the Torah phrases as a real character. And what this is telling us is that someone who speaks this way in their pain, Chazal are prepared to say, objectively, what they're saying is kfira, and Hashem at the same time can say about this, Loken Avdi Iyov, my servant Iyov, who spoke truth, because he was saying things as he experienced them in his pain. Now, this isn't a heter for any of us to choose to blaspheme when we're going through a tough time, because as soon as we're conscious of making a choice, then we need to weigh it up. But it's an amazing message about when we see people going through suffering. And according to this reading that the Rambam quotes from Chazal, there are other readings, this is Hashem's complaint to the friends. So you have Iyov, the kofar, the blasphemer, the heretic, in one stage of his life, going through pain, who Hashem describes as Avdi Iyov, and you have the friends of Iyov who say the correct hashkafa back, who are told they have to bring korbanos because they gave mussar to someone who's suffering and didn't understand what he was going through. So I think this is the in this reading at least, the intertwining of the pain. So in answer to your question, we're going to see that Hashem does respond to this. This isn't the end of Sefer Iyov. We're less than halfway through when Iyov is saying this. And in any understanding of Chazal, ultimately to say Hashem is indifferent is kafira, absolutely. And yet Chazal say Hashem can look after someone who said that and say Lokein Avdi Iyov. I think there should be in that a comfort for those of us who go through tough times and wobble, and also a message about how we speak to people going through tough times. It doesn't mean Chas v'shalom to say you're right, God doesn't care and encourage the heresy, but it is a message around sheep comfort and how we respond. Sorry.
In the initial view of the friend, because you suffered, you must have been evil.
Yeah.
It's totally overturned, but because this is also saying everybody suffers.
That's Iyov's reply.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. 100%. He's responding to the friends, and he's saying to the friends, your platitudes and your words don't mean anything. Even if I've sinned, I've looked in the mirror, I've done what you've asked, and I've recognized I'm not perfect, but I've been punished 10 times more than I deserved in my suffering. That's his response to the friends. I'm fed up with your words, right? That's what he says in chapter 19. And he says, I'm turning to Hashem and I'm calling out, you're doing against me Hamas. There's no mishpat here. Yeah. 100%. I just want to use the remaining moments. By the way, I should say, because I'm conscious that as much as this is a Sefer of Nach that we're studying, it's also stuff that we all go through, right? We all go through sometimes overwhelming difficulties and pain. So if anything I'm saying is it's easy again to sit in the comfort of share and speak about, pontificate about these things, and in a way that's what Iyov's friends do to Iyov. So if anything I'm saying is upsetting anyone or bothering anyone, please speak to me on group or off group. But we're trying to learn a Sefer of Tanakh and seeing what we can make of it. I want to just conclude with a thought that I saw many years ago in Iyov. It's not my own original idea. It comes from a certain thinker who writes about this, and they argue that there is a parallel, a deliberate textual parallel between the Akedah and Iyov in how the story is set up, because the Akedah is the closest, or perhaps the Torah comes to grappling with needless suffering and the affliction of the perfect. And I've just simply lined up here based upon this piece. Again, not my own ideas, but some of the parallel language that's used. And I just want to use the remaining few minutes just to run through some of the parallel language. Iyov opens with, there's a land in Utz called Iyov. We've already seen Ish Hayob Eretz Utz. We've already seen the Rambam's thoughts on Iyov. He's described as Yirei Elokim. We saw that already. He's God-fearing. Later, and we saw Chazal quoted this, someone speaking, and they speak about Iyov property being affected by a custody raid on his camels. We saw a figure called Elihu Habuzi, and this is all the top box, Mishpachas Rom. By the way, in the previous year, we saw that Chazal interpret Mishpachas Rom as the family of Avram. Now, this language of Buzi from Mishpachas Rom, Yori Hashem, Kasti Uz, are all found in the context of the genealogy of Avram straight after the Akedah. Es Utz Bechoroi, Ves Buz Ochiv, Ves Kmol Avi Aram, Ves Kesed, etc. And Avram is described after the Akedah as don't Vayoma al Tishlach Yodcha El Hana, don't lift up your hand against the lad, etc. Kirei Elokim Ata, because I know that you are God-fearing. So there's a parallel of language. Iyov uses the language of Otha v'Efer, ve'es mashal ka'Otha v'Efer, I'm compared to Otha and Efer. Al kain emos v'nechamti, I regret my words and I change direction. Al Otha v'Efer being but dust and ashes, and famously Avram describes himself as Otha v'Anochi Otha v'Efer, again printed in the next box. And at the end of the story, Iyov is described as Vayomos Iyov Zokein or Sava Yomim, and Avram is described famously as Vayugav Yomos Avram, B'Seiva Tova Zokein v'Savea. So the suggestion is that there is a parallel deliberately being used here in how Avram is referred to as he goes through the Akedah, and Iyov as he goes through his experiences. I want to highlight one other word in this context, which will serve as an introduction to Emir Hashem next week when we begin looking at responses. And this is the word Nechama. And I just want to spend a few moments talking about Nechama because I think this is an important word for all of us. So Nechama is consolation. And we say it to people when they've gone through a tough time. Hamokim Yenachim, Eschem, etc. And the word is an important word in Sefer Iyov. Iyov I printed this in Iyov's response. Iyov responds in chapter 42. He says, Al kain emas, I abhor my words. I find my previous words revolting. This is at the end of Iyov, when Iyov recognizes he's behaved badly. V'nechamti, and he says, I've found comfort, which I translated as change direction. Al off of Efer, these words we just saw, because I'm dust and ashes. And the story also mentions at the end of the story, etc. And they comforted him on all the evil that Hashem had brought against him. So I just want to speak for a couple of minutes about this word Nechama and what is Nechama. And I translated Nechama as changing direction. We just had this a couple of weeks ago. V'lo nocham elokim derech eretz pelishtim, etc. Hashem didn't lead them and didn't turn their direction towards. And I want to speak about this because I think it has psychological importance and also philosophical importance. that when we wish someone a choma, what are we saying to them? And the first stage of loss and bereavement and grief, as is well known, is confusion. We just can't process what's going on. We don't know how to make sense of it. People who have suffered a loss often say they're not even feeling pain yet. They're just feeling completely confused. Nothing makes sense to them. Everything they thought they knew about life it isn't there. They thought that they were going to go through life hand in hand with someone they loved, and that isn't the case. Even when it's an expected death, so-called, so it's a very elderly relative or whatever, but still we all have an imagination that this person's always going to be around. And now we're confused. We just don't know how to make sense of it. The Kabbalim point out that when we are in pain, our first physiological response is that of tears, which is literally a blurring of our vision, and as we can't see where we're going. The word for tears in Lashon HaKodesh is dema, which means confusion. So tears are called tears because they blurring. That's the literal translation of the word tears. Our vision is blurred. We also, by the way, cry, and our vision becomes blurred when we hear very good news, because we're confused. We don't know how to process it either. The difference is that with good news, we begin processing it much quicker, and therefore the tears very quickly stop. So if someone's just won the lottery, they cry maybe with emotion also, because they thought they were going to go every day for the rest of their careers to the factory line and stick a label onto a can as it goes past. And now they're confused, like, what am I doing, and how do I handle this great fortune, and where do I go with all of this? But the tears quickly stop as they begin dreaming where this takes them. They've found nechama. What does that mean? They've found nechama. They've found a new direction. They're quite quickly able in that case. You can talk about someone hearing good news also finding nechama, because they've found direction. I thought my life meant me going into the factory every day. I now discover my life means me buying a mansion in the suburbs and going on an endless vacation. So they've found a new path. Nechama after loss is recognition that there is a new path. It's not the path I wanted. It's not the path I dreamt about. It's not the path I chose. But there is a path. There is a way to go forward. And that's what we mean when we talk about comfort. Comfort doesn't mean one doesn't forget what one's lost. Comfort doesn't mean that one isn't aware of the pain. That's not a comfort. Comfort doesn't mean that one's in illusion. It means I see there's a different path going forward. And I finish with that for today, simply so that we're not leaving on a bitter note, because we're leaving on a very, very painful note. We've left Iyov in despair, and we haven't yet seen Hashem's response to Iyov. But we should know, since I looked at the posuk of Efer, and that includes the word nechamti, I've used it as an excuse just to talk about this word nechama, that even when going through the most difficult times, one can see there is a path forward. It's not what I thought. I thought my path would be hands in hands with this person. It's not, and that's very painful to contemplate. But there's a different path I'm going on, a different way I'm going forward. The analogy they use is if you've for many months been planning a dream holiday in Italy, and you've mapped everything out. You've had your tourist guidebook, and you've done all research, and you've booked your hotel and so on. And as you get onto the plane, you board the plane, and as the plane is landing, the pilot says, welcome to Geneva, and you realize you've just gone to the wrong place. It's not what you planned, and it's going to be difficult, but it doesn't mean it's not a worthwhile place to also be at. Now, obviously, that's a pat and trivial comparison to someone who goes through difficulty, but the point is that there's somewhere else where you're landing. That's the literal meaning of the word nechama. So a little bit of etymology. The meaning of the word nechama is to turn direction, to find direction. The first stage of pain is this confusion, and this is what we've seen Iyov go through. And then the second stage, there's many other stages, but the eventual outcome that one wants to have is nechama, which is I've found a new direction. And that's why Iyov can talk about when he engages into teshuva, which is what this pasuk is. And he says, I regret my words, v'nechamti. Nechamti means I've found comfort, or I've found a new direction, and his friends are able to offer nechama. So in next time we learn together, we'll look at this. As a little bit of homework, I will give a sample of this. I'll just encourage everyone next time, first of all, to turn up with a Sefer Iyov, because we will look at some psukim in more detail. And secondly, if you have time, to read Parakim 38, 39, 40. They are amongst they're very, very challenging, but they're amongst the most overwhelmingly beautiful psukim. I can't say this, we're talking about Tanakh, but for me, they're amongst the most amazingly beautiful psukim in Tanakh. but very, very powerful. I remember reading them as a child and just being blown away by these psukim. And they're stuck with me. They're still like burnt into me. So if you do have a chance just to have a look at some of these psukim, that where HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks about him and us and our relationship and what's our relationship meant to be. And next week we'll try and we'll try and learn that. But for now we'll stop for today.
Oh, thank you.
So, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you very much.